Howdy, folks. So today I'm going to try something a little different. I've re-edited footage that I recorded during the COVID interruption semester and incorporated it into this video. I've done that for a couple of reasons. One, I was curious to see if I could recover the footage, and I figured it would remind us all of how much progress we've made in terms of filming. I filmed these from random spaces in my apartment. So without further ado, let me introduce you to myself as we talk about both test administration techniques as well as interviewing techniques. Specifically, this module is going to cover the following four big topics. First, we're going to cover test administration and discuss some of the factors that influence test administration. These include establishing rapport, things like that. Next, we're going to talk about factors that influence assessment, behavioral assessment in particular. And those two module chunks will cover our test administration aspect of testing. Next, I've included a chunk on interview techniques, both from the perspective of the interviewer as well as a little bit from the interviewee. And that's broken up into, you guessed it, two chunks. And the first one is going to cover effective interview techniques. These will be useful to you in terms of as you kind of seek out jobs outside of the Wake Forest bubble. So that's the first part. The second part is going to be interviewing skills like active listening and whatnot. So that's where we're going. And now still not going to introduce you to myself. I've got a couple more slides to go. So that's where we're going. Now, this time, we are going to cover factors that influence test administration. And now I will introduce myself. Enjoy.
Hey class, welcome back to my apartment. Currently there is no one in the Pineapple of Solitude, but I'd like to just say a couple of things, bookkeeping things. So the shelter-in-place order in Winston-Salem goes into effect today at 5. Given that I suspect very strongly that Wake Forest is not going to have students return to class. They officially have not made that decision yet. However, given that the shelter-in-place order goes till the 15th or 7th, it goes till the very least mid April. So I would assume that we are not coming back. And this is a weird way to end a semester. But I'm going to do my best to try and get us through this with as little more chaos as possible. So I'm fine. I'm not sick. None of my family is sick. I am making do with the fact that I can't get a version of the online textbook. It's the major downside of this class, or of the content. And the advantage of the book that we had was that it was cheap. And now that advantage is very much a major downside. And so that's another reason why there was some delay on my end. So Tuki is approaching and is trying to get out of the apartment because he wants to go on his morning walk. So you may hear him meowing. And he likely will show up in the Pineapple of Solitude from time to time. This guy. So today, I'm going to kind of move us ahead to kind of talk about test administration. We've finished like the major core heart of the class with all the statistical aspects, and so I'm trying to view that as a silver lining. But from now on, all content is going to be based on the lectures and any supplemental materials that I can find. Realistically, I won't be able to do that just because time. But again, thank you for bearing with me. I'm hoping that my transparency at least gives you some sense that we're all in this together. And yeah, I'm going to kind of just talk a bit and then upload these slides and send out repeated announcements from my apartment. Yeah, I hope everyone is doing well. I know I've touched base with many of you. Again, sorry, I'm kind of deviating, but let me back up. So yeah, test administration. So there are tons of factors that affect test administration. We talked about some of these early in the class, but I wanted to kind of wrap up because now that we know more about statistical test theory, we can talk about how the situations we see in class or during test administration can have a drastic effect on performance, which seems fairly relevant right now. So yeah, so when we talk about reliability, we are interested in sources of or random source of error because but there are also systematic error that are more than just just random normal distributions of noise. And these can affect test performance both systematically and asystematically, but often they are predictable. And there are tons of factors that affect testing administration. These are just some. I did not add coronavirus to this list, but it will, and I can only imagine how much interesting research is going on about how to interpret test scores. Tests are being canceled, people are being affected intermittently, and it's going to be weird. Oh, sorry, I keep diverging. My apologies. Excuse me. Tuki! Come here. He really wants to go outside. But unfortunately, I cannot take him and his rotundness for a walk. And I also don't want to fall more far behind in the class. So I think for some of this lecture, I'm going to have to hold him until he stops sulking. Sorry, I realize that this is so bizarre. But yeah, so there's lots of factors. Both rapport, so how comfortable you are with the test administrator. There's also some research that suggests that ethnicity affects it, both same race and opposite race effects, mainly to feel at home and comfortable. Language, as we've already talked about, experience for test administrators. Those that are inexperienced tend to have fewer or those that are inexperienced make more errors, and those that are more experienced make fewer. There's also expectancy effects, use of reinforcement, computer adaptive testing can have an impact both on our ability to take tests in a timely manner, but also testing strategies change, and just content related to the class. Math anxiety and people who are convinced they're not math people, even though I believe in you all. Those that aren't can interact and make you have increased levels of anxiety. Yeah, excuse me, let's see. Yeah, so here's some more about rapport. I'm trying to be fairly efficient, but also give you a lot of resources. It's really important to establish rapport. Without it, you it I mean it's really essential. If you students perform better with enhanced rapport over unenhanced rapport. Okay, excuse me. Okay. All right. He's a cat. And yeah. So yeah, performance improves. Or even, maybe not even performance, scoring improves. There's debate on that. But students are more willing to persist if they feel comfortable with the administrator. They're more likely to ask questions. At least for older kids. Younger kids, less so, because they're still trying to figure out how to human more so than older kids. And kids tend to perform worse when their administrator makes disapproving comments than when they make neutral or positive comments. And I realize some of these citations are pretty old, but this research has been around for a while. So it's not shocking to, or well, some people find it shocking, but yeah, if you say discouraging things, that's why I try and be very positive and upbeat, because it affects performance. And that's also, yeah, it does. You persist less, even for things where there's, some kind of objective or like well measured construct, you have changes in performance. And kids that are unfamiliar with the administrator, so if you just go in with and like say nothing, just hand them the test, they do worse. And it rapport is pretty easy to establish. You just don't be a jerk, and like that pretty much gets you to neutral. It's really important. And so both with kids, so it seems that there are interactions here. This older meta-analysis shows that kids that are more familiar with a test taker score 4 points better. That's a third of a standard deviation. So that's an effect size of 0.3, or a little more than, yeah, so a little less than 0.3. So it's a little less than a third of a standard deviation. That's a lot. If you're on the boundary between like, an A and a B, like that's 4 point, that's a big difference. Now, if you can get larger gains and offset some kind of more background disadvantage, so there seems to be an interaction between socioeconomic status and familiarity, so you get larger gains to kids that have less advantage. So rapport is really, really important to give kids with lower SES who already have disadvantaged backgrounds elsewhere a fighting chance. That's half a standard deviation. That's a lot. That's a medium to large effect size. I have published studies with fewer effect, like with way smaller, like magnitudes. So again, there's some debate here. So it's not universally better. So self-report versus interview on attitudes tend to disclose more to when there isn't a person. They tend to disclose more to a computer than to a human. So sometimes, so regardless of how much rapport you establish. So sometimes it's better not to have a person there, but it's important for situations that aren't viewed as like person focused, that are, excuse me, sorry about that. Rapport is important for situations that aren't viewed as like person based or like judgment based or anything that's like atypical. it's important to establish these relationships. It really is. But like it's not universal. So sometimes it's better to do a computer administered survey. But if you have to have a person there, you want there to be good rapport. So I kind of already babbled a little about this, but ethnicity, there is debate. I have the coolest, like culturally fair, or it's this one of the early examples of culturally fair tests where they have you where they have test administrators match the kid they're interviewing to they have these cute little like pictures. Again, I wish I had them. They're in my office. Uh, but they made sure that they had lots of different variants of what the kid looked like. So in these diagrams, so these kind of like a not a Rorschach, but any of the projective tests, and so like having that ethnicity piece, it did help. But mainly, but it, yeah. So again, when I can get access to my office, even at the after this class end, I will upload some of those. They're really, really cool because like there's so much detailed test administration behind it, and it gives you lots of clear instructions on how to interpret. And I mean, I think it's from 1986, but it's really helpful in those cases where they're screening for kind of like adolescent like abuse and just identifying at-risk kids. So it's less so for intelligence tests. So in cross-ethnic administration doesn't seem to have an effect. And the only times they found significance was when paraprofessionals, so like not hobbyists, but that's probably the closest way to think about paraprofessionals who are administering the tests. And it seems that the differences go away when there are standardization procedures. So when we don't actively try and treat all our subjects the same, all our interviewees the same, we find that there are differences. Shocking that when we don't actively try and treat people equally, we sometimes don't treat them equally. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to keep going. I could go on, but I want to make sure we cover all the key points. So language. So how valid are tests given to in English to bilingual or people with limited English proficiency? They're not so great. I mean, if you asked me to take a test in Portuguese, like an IQ test in Portuguese, I don't speak Portuguese at all. I have a friend who's fluent and I care about him, so I tried to learn a little. Oh, I'm so bad at Portuguese, but I can only imagine how hard that would be with high stakes testing. There's just spending those cognitive resources trying to figure out what's being asked so that you can give a good answer. So instead of just spending all that energy trying to find the right answer, you have to figure out what they're asking. That's rough. Looking at how my Eastern European family came over, they came over in the 50s, and so I have a lot of their documents, and looking at how my opa's kind of responses, it's very clear that like his handwriting is really blocky and he's just and it's very short and in some of his like early like administrations of like just forms and to fill out for citizenship, and as he went along, he got better at English. Also my grandma got better at ghostwriting for him because she was pretty fluent when she came over as a kid. But yeah, so just that alone, and so translations are really important because you don't want your whoever is taking your test to have to essentially translate it for you. So it is standard practice to administer tests in a person's most proficient language, just so that you don't have to worry as much about that cognitive load. But you still have to create a normative sample and how you compare scores across languages. IRT can help to kind of examine whether your people who are scoring, equally well are scoring like are just as likely for any estimated ability level and whatever it is are scoring just as well using the foreign language version as they would on the English language version. You want those difficulties to be the same. And so this is a big source of potential bias. Just the cognitive resources you have to spend for anything that's high stakes. It's less, slightly less of a burden when you have lower stakes where there's not like a correct answer. You're just trying to get information and it's not time. There are ways to mitigate this, but it's a really big issue that we don't often look at. Like Ellis Island is a notorious example. Again, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. So many funny anecdotes about how language and tests, but again, we're gonna make sure that I stay on task.
Hello again. This time, or nope, I lied. I am going to wrap up this video recording chunk on factors that influence test administration. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for hanging in there. And shoot me emails if you have questions. You'll see me in a bit. Bye-bye!